Hello, friends, and welcome to the Little Woman podcast. I thought I would read you one of the grammatic changes between the 1868 Little Woman book and the revised version of the 1880. I can't help, I am just completely fascinated by all the changes. All of these come from the research by Princess Sarissa. Big thanks to her for delighting us. Most of the changes are in punctuation and letters, correcting small spelling errors, adding or subtracting commas and dashes, replacing semicolons with periods, replacing a few periods with exclamation marks for emotional emphasis, replacing everyone with everyone with a space. I won't bother citing all those differences, but I am listing the actual edits to the text. The revised edition corrects grammar, reduces the amount of slang and other quote-unquote vulgar language, which isn't vulgar at all by modern standards, and makes a few questionable changes to the physical descriptions of certain characters. Allegedly, most of the changes were made by an editor and not by Louisa May Alcott herself. The two versions are interesting to compare. End quote. And these are from the chapter 1, Playing Pilgrims, 1868. I don't think it is fair for some girls to have lots of pretty things and other girls nothing at all. 1880. I don't think it is fair for some girls to have plenty of pretty things and other girls nothing at all. 1868. Teaching those dreadful children nearly all day. 1880. Teaching those tiresome children nearly all day. 1868. So I'll have some left to buy something for me, added Amy. 1880. So I'll have some left to buy my pencils, added Amy. Okay, this one is interesting, about Mommy. 1868. She wasn't a particularly handsome person, but mothers are always lovely to their children. And the girls thought the grey cloak and unfashionable bonnet covered the most splendid woman in the world. 1880. She was not elegantly dressed, but a noble-looking woman, and the girls thought the grey cloak and unfashionable bonnet covered the most splendid mother in the world. 1868. I am a selfish pig. 1880. I am a selfish girl. All right. Part about Mommy was a bit surprising, but the first description, it is more honest. It is more honest, and I think more loving as well. Alright, let's get into the topic of today's episode. My guest is lovely Dana Parra. Dana and I met some years ago in the Louisa May Alcott fans Facebook group. I stopped Facebook a couple of years ago, so you won't find me there. But my hate for social media giants is not topic of this episode. If something good came up, being a member on that particular group was having lovely chats with Dana. And Dana, if you are listening to this, I am very sorry that this episode is airing just now. That is because the recordings were on my old laptop, which died. And last year I was able to bring it back to life, which was amazing. And I was able to revive this episode and also old photos that I thought I had lost for the ages. Sometimes miracles happen. Earlier we had Bobby as a guest, and Bobby is a super fan of 1994 Little Woman. Dana is a super fan of the 1949 film. So these next episodes are going to be about 1949 Little Woman. I didn't see the 1949 version until when I started to make this podcast, but Dana grew up with that particular version. And it was lovely to hear her thoughts about the novel and this film. Listeners, if you are a super fan of Little Woman adaptations and you would like to chat with me, let me know. I would love to have you on the podcast, especially if someone is a super fan of an adaptation that is more rare and less known. I would love to hear your thoughts. You can find my contact info from the description. As always, you can join my Little Woman newsletter at littlewomanchannel.substack.com and get notified when new episodes appear. This is the Little Woman podcast. Episode will be great or nothing. Enjoy! would you like to tell about yourself to the listeners?
Sure. Just to give just a quick why I'm into Little Women, I guess. So this is what this is all about. I grew up watching an animated version of Little Women when I was growing up. It was one of the Japanese anime movies that was dubbed in English.
I remember that. Jo had a long blonde hair.
She did. Yeah, it's only the first part of the book, and I mean it's nowhere near what the story is supposed to be. But it was enough that I made my parents rent this movie for me over and over and over again. I actually own a VHS copy of it, but the older I got, I eventually saw the 94 version, which I think kind of cemented it. I think by the time I was in the 6th grade, which I feel for a lot of people when you hear when they say when they first read the book, it's all about that kind of age there. Yeah, I'm like 8, maybe 12 years old. I just absolutely fell in love with it and then just became rather obsessed. So it was really easy for people to buy things for me if it had anything to do with Louisa May Alcott. I was lucky enough about 6 years ago to actually go to Orchard House with my mom. So that was, and that was the whole reason I was kind of like Louisa, where she had her with her needs and stuff. I got into this point into my life where I was just like, I needed to do something. I need to go someplace. And I told my mom that I wanted to go to Massachusetts and I wanted to go to Orchard House. And we went. And it was probably the best trip I've ever taken. And I've never felt so homesick for a place I had never been before. Wow. Out there. It was definitely weird when I came back. My dad kept asking me when was I moving to Massachusetts. But I am a California girl who lives in the desert of Arizona, so I don't think the winters in Massachusetts would really agree with me too much.
That's amazing. I haven't been to Orchard House yet, but maybe someday.
I absolutely cannot wait to go back. There were things that we didn't get a chance to do. Some things were closed. What was really interesting about the trip that kind of pertains also to like the movies of Little Women is one of the houses in Boston that we went to go see, because you can go into it. It is open for tours, is the Gibson house, which is the house that they used as the boarding house in the 2019 Little Women film. What's interesting is I guess it's a place where they do tours every hour. So you just kind of have to like, you show up and then, once they hit, like 5 or 10 minutes after the hour, they shut the door and they do the tour. Well, I don't know if we went at the right time or what, but nobody else was there when we were there. So my mom and I got this like personalized tour of the Gibson house. And so it's kind of funny when I watch the movie and I'm like, like I've gone up those stairs. I've been in that room. Like I've been to that place before.
I didn't see the 1949 film until 3 years ago. I saw it for the first time. I still think it is one of them, has a lot of things that are very, very close to the novel.
I can agree with that. I can't even think of when I first saw it because I knew I have my VHS copy that I grew up with, so I know I probably saw it sometime when I was growing up after I saw the 94 version. So I'd already seen one, and with a lot of things, I tend to like once I like latch on to something that I like, I just want to absorb everything. So when I found out there were more versions, I was like, "Ooh, give it to me! Let's see how this is different." There's just something about the 1949 film. And I feel like when you ask fans of the book and of the films, what's your favorite version? Obviously, everyone has different opinions. But I always find that whoever mentions the 1949 film always talks about it with this like fond nostalgia. and they can like acknowledge that, it's a little different from the book, obviously some of the things that were left out and whatnot, but but they still love it. There's just something about that movie, and I totally agree. There's just this warmth to it where, I could put it on and I just get like a happy feeling inside when I watch it.
I have the same with the 1994 film, probably because I grew up watching it, but I think there has the similar atmosphere in the 1994 film and the 1949 film. And especially if we compare them to some of the newest ones, they tend to be very nihilistic, which is the opposite of Little Woman and the whole spirit of it. I think you and we discussed this before about the relationship of the sisters in the 1949 film and how it sort of embodies that the warmth that the sisters have and the fondness they have for each other.
When you look at the different films, and I don't know if I'm the only one who does this, but I'm sure plenty of people do when you watch anthologies, I look at, not only the appearance, because sometimes I'll put on one of, the different versions and I'm like, I can't believe any of these girls are sisters because they don't look like sisters. They may act like sisters, but they don't look like sisters. And then sometimes you watch a version where they act like sisters but don't look like it. And I feel like the 49 is definitely one where I don't know if I would buy that by appearance alone they look like they're sisters, but I buy that they're sisters because they just have just that sisterly bond connection that they all have with each other. And I can't think of what I read just either the other night or the other day, and I can't remember who said it, but kind of like with like every sister has their like position, its group, kind of like, your friends. You have your different versions of, you have, who's the popular one, the quiet one, the smart one, the outgoing one. And, you always hear about like the not rivalry, but you hear about, Joe and Amy, and they're always butting head. And I think the quote I read was saying something about like this rivalry where they were not trying to one up each other, but, and I just remember reading it. So it's like, but they're kind of equals. They're just different. And I think what's nice about this film is I feel like you see more of the equality between them and you don't see as much. But like in the opening scene of the movie where you meet all the sister and they're just kind of talking and Joe is making fun of Amy's, vocabulary. Yeah. And yet, like, she's not really being mean about it. Like, you can see that even though, they have that whole, I detest rude and the ladylike girls and I hate, affected niminy piminy chits. But they're still able, like, even if, Beth wasn't playing Peacemaker with, birds in a little nest agree, you can still see that, like, both sisters are like, well, still above each other. Yeah. And I think that I think that's kind of the overall feeling with that movie. And maybe that's why, there's that warmth. There doesn't necessarily always feel like there's a lot of conflict.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I watched it yesterday. There were times when Meg was criticizing Jo the way she behaved, but she never said it in a mean-spirited way. She was just looking after her and her reputation. So I don't think there's conflicts in the same sense like in some other films. And I really like the part where Jo is in New York and then Amy and Aunt March are going to Europe and then Amy really feels bad for Jo. Yeah, I think it's very different than in other films. It's also in some ways more closer to the novel because, Amy did feel bad for Jo that she didn't get to go.
Because that happened with what it calls, isn't it? Where one calls. And I think you kind of see it in the 2017 PBS film where you actually see them go on the call. And, even that scene starts off with like Amy being like, I don't need to wear that coat. Jo, I don't care what people think. Like, it looks like rain. Like, I'm going to be comfortable. And I mean, it's a very Joe kind of thing to do. And then when they're there, like, she just says what she feels. And you can see like the look on Amy's face where she's just like, like, oh my gosh, Joe, like, please be quiet. And I want to say the 78 miniseries, when Joe finds out that she's not going, like, I think one of the first things that she even says is like, oh, like my mouth, or like, off my like, she like immediately acknowledges, I'm the reason I'm not going. And I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that Joe still can't be jealous of Amy. I mean, upset, who wouldn't? Like, I would be upset if my sister was going someplace that I had always wanted to go. Amy is kind of better suited. So that's kind of, the path in life that she's taken. She was a little bit of a companion sometimes to Aunt March than Joe was.
Yeah, and in the book, Joe even says that she hates French. They are going to France. I think the 1949 film, it's one of the films that also shows very clearly how poor the family is. In the way the Marches, they go to see the Hummels, and also there's the scene where the girls go Christmas window shopping.
I like too when you watch the film, and I don't know how many of them do this. I think the 94 does it as well.
Yeah.
But you can see that they share each other's clothes, or at least Joe and Beth do, because there's at least one time or two where you notice that Beth is wearing Joe's dresses. When Joe comes home from New York, Beth is wearing one of Joe's dresses. And I can't remember if I think it's the brown one that she wears. But I want to say it's one of the first instances where you see them recycling the clothes. The 94 version does this as well. You see adult Amy wearing Meg's blue dress that she went to Sally Moffat's in. Beth, when she's coming down the stairs, when she's recovering from scarlet fever, she's wearing the red dress that I believe Joe to the dance. She had Laurie, so she wouldn't have minded if there was any scorch marks on the back because she was at home. But the 49 version did that, and I always remember thinking like, and that's what they say, like they're always handing down their dresses because they didn't have the money to go buy new ones. And aside from the book, even during that time period, people only had, maybe one or two different dresses or different pieces of clothing that they could kind of shuffle around in their wardrobe.
Yeah, and usually people had maybe one or two like Sunday dresses or nicer occasions. Someone made a blog post about the clothes in the 1949 film, and they pointed out that Joe has this almost like a military type of outfit because she has these lined buttons and the stripe pattern in most of the outfits during the film.
I never thought about that.
Yeah.
I do like that scene where, and not only does she, not like being a boy, but the fact that, she has to, turn her hair up. She just doesn't like that, that role that, she kind of has no choice but to be in. It always just kind of cocks me up a little bit how it's not that she's conforming to it, but, Meg goes along with it. And so I just love how when, Joe's kind of throwing this little tantrum and she's like, I don't want to be some pokey old woman just sitting and knitting. And, here's Meg sewing and she's like, oh, knitting. Yeah. I like that. So terrible.
She has like a self-deprecating sense of humor. And Meg's clothes, there's lots of lace and, it's more feminine. I think as the movie progresses, Joe's outfits, they become a bit more softer as she grows. She looks more mature.
I can definitely see that. And maybe it's, it's a way to kind of show through the clothes that, as people get older, they change. And, there's nothing wrong with that.
No, it's a natural cycle of life.
And I feel sometimes that people forget about that, like with this story.
Oh, they do that all the time.
Well, yeah, and especially with Joe. And I think they read the beginning of this book and they get so caught up in, oh, she's so independent and she's so, she wants to be out of, that box. She wants to be different. And that what she does grow up like everybody does. And she starts to change because of, her life experiences and, everything that she's going through. I don't know. Sometimes I just feel that people kind of look at that like, oh, she's losing herself because she's no longer doing what she wanted. And it's like, she's still doing what she wanted because she's growing. Like, I may have wanted one thing when I was growing up, but I may not want that now, but that doesn't mean I don't like what it was.
I think it's also because a lot of people read Little Women when they are kids and they get stuck with it, the 15-year-old Jo. But I think one of the problems that the films have, they really gloss over Jo's flaws. And in the novel, Jo is very, very aware of her flaws and that her anger is out of control a lot of times. I like the book burning incident, like Jo was bullying Amy for weeks before that happened. It's hardly ever in the films.
Yeah, I like how we were saying how the 49 version doesn't always seem to have conflict. Like that's a pivotal part of that book that gets left out of this film version. Because not only do you have the burning of the book and, the teasing that leads kind of up to it, but you don't have the follow-up with, Amy falling through the ice and Jo, her anger still getting in the way, and then like her being like, oh, like, this is my sister, like this is more important than anything. Sometimes you miss out on this piece of Amy and Jo in some of the earlier films, and why they didn't put it in. I mean, whether they didn't want to do, not that it would have been like a special effect, because they back then they could have done it, chose to admit it, for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I think if you are going to include the book burning incident, you should always include also the part of, Jo bullying Amy, but the films never do that. Only the 2018 film does it.
It's weird, or not weird, but like, and especially when you see like that one, so that takes place in a modern setting.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that kind of goes, how on earth are they going to make this scene work? Because, this is, in this time period, like today, you're not going to be scribbling around like in, on paper.
Yeah.
But when you have computers, but Jo is like, no, like there's nothing like writing in a notebook. And it made me feel good because I have so many notebooks, but they make it work. And it's totally believable because really see that bickering between Jo and Amy. And you see it kind of throughout the movie, not just like, we haven't showed them not getting along yet, so we're going to show it like right here so people know that there's conflict between these two. And, there's always that conflict, it's always there. And obviously, it changes as they get older because I have a younger sister, and when we were growing up, we fought like cats and dogs. And now that we're older, my sister is my best friend. It's definitely something that anybody who has a sister, you associate and relate to it.
That's what I really liked reading the part 2 when I read it for the first time, because both Jo and Amy matured. And I have like new profound appreciation for the novel. When I was watching the 1949 film, and then there was Aunt March, and I liked that the scene where John proposes to Meg was very close to the novel, about the way he forgot his umbrella.
My favorite part about that scene, which has nothing to do with the book itself, and if I say this, you may never watch the scene the same way again.
Okay.
Trevor told it. When Aunt March comes in and like surprises them, John makes this like oop sound before he like kind of skedaddles to the other room. And I notice it like every single time I watch that movie, and it always seems like kind of out of place for John, since he seems like he's just this very like straight-laced, person. And I know it's not like a character thing, it's just what the actor happened to do. But there's also this little part of me that's just like, I'm like, I could see John doing that, like being so surprised that he kind of like drops that, not persona that he had, that he even that decorum, and he's like, oh, like, but I gotta get out of here. Some of you watch it, see, you notice that he does that.
I really like Lucille Watson as Aunt March, because she's supposed to be this very grumpy character. She got it.
You can definitely see how she's grumpy, but at the same time, you can totally tell that she loves not just the girls, but like the family. I think a lot of people can relate to that, where you have this family member that may not agree with you, but like at the end of the day, you know, they're your family, which kind of is one of the reasons why and you know, the films, why it makes it kind of so timeless, is how relatable all that stuff is. I may not have a stucky at March, but I definitely probably have some family members who don't see eye to eye with me, but I know they've always got my back.
There was a really funny scene when Aunt March is coming for a visit. She and Joe, they start to argue straight away. And then when she goes outside, Joe is just like, hey, I want to come to work for you. I want to read books for you. And she's like, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. Something like that.
And I never, kind of going back to like Meg and John, when they're talking, every time I watch, whatever, film version it is, and, he's like, I'll wait for you. And there's always this part of me that was like, oh, okay, yeah, like Meg's young, this is only taking place maybe a year or so after the start of the book, which, like, when you hear, like, her saying, Marby thinks I'm too young, and you're like, well, of course you're too young. You're a teenager. People forget not just that John is older, but, like, I didn't really even realize how much older he was until recently, where I was like, well, not hopefully, like, well, of course their parents want him, they want them to wait because, she's really young, but he's like almost, 10 years. And it's a shame that with some of the film versions, you don't see the relationship, or at least hear of the relationship that John built with Clarence while he's there in Washington.
I think there's some of that in the 1994 film.
The 2017 does it, I think, pretty well. Like, you see, like, John taking care of Marmee when she's there. And I want to say that's the film version too, where when Joe is talking to Marmee about it, and she, like, says John instead of Mr. Brooke, and Joe's like, excuse me? Like, when did this happen? Oh, like, we've gotten to know him really well. Like, we like him. He's a good guy.
In the 2017 series, I think they also showed John as a soldier and the way he listed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the 49 film, which, I always kind of cracks me up, is when you watch it, John has already been military. And they flat out tell you in the beginning of the movie, when they meet, when the sisters are having tea, and Hannah, goes to close the shutters because, Laurie's looking in the window. And when she talks about Laurie, she's just like, oh, like he ran away from home. We joined the army. He lied about his age. And which I guess in that film universe, that's what he did. So in a sense, like, it's almost like the film is trying to, like, play him up, because Joe went like, oh, like, I'd like to do the same. And you got, when Hannah's like, she ran away from school, and Amy's like, well, that's the bravest thing I ever heard of. Like, who would want to be friends with, this mischievous boy next door who's, been in the army? But, I do kind of, I guess, like how that's how he met John, where they served together.
It's a very absurd idea for me that Laurie would go to the army, the way he behaves in the novel.
Are they implying that he was already living in the United States? Because when he comes to the U.S. from Italy, or at least from Europe, if I'm not mistaken. And so, I mean, like, why would he have, like, run away from home in Europe and be like, you know what, I'm going to go join this war going on in the United States that I probably know nothing about? It is kind of weird, but I think it's like the movie's way of kind of playing up the character and maybe even romanticizing him a little bit. They're giving maybe not just the sisters, but they're giving the audience a reason to be like, oh yeah, like Laurie, she ran away from school, because they don't imply what school he ran away from. And because all these actors look older, you could just oh, he ran away for college. He ran away from college. He joined the army, because you could have gone to college and been teen. So, for for the audiences watching that, they would be like, and especially the fact that this movie came out after World War II. And so, kind of having that patriotism still kind of coursing through everybody's veins. And everybody would probably be very happy that the war was over. There's a YouTube video, I forget who does it, but they make that point with that film, and they kind of make a point with like the 33 version and the 90 and even the 2019, where and I can agree with this, where with each film is not exactly tailor-made to the time period that's coming out in, but you can see how certain aspects of the novel are slayed into what was currently going in at the time, so that so that audiences would latch on even more to the story, because it was a way of like the film's kind of going like, you've gone through this too.
That's a trend to try to force Little Woman's universe to our modern setting, whatever that setting might be.
I had a conversation actually with my sister last night where we were kind of talking about stuff like that. When you're adapting something like a book to whether it's a movie or a TV series or what have you, obviously it's the writer or the producer or the director's kind of interpretation of the source material. So everybody's going to have different opinions or thoughts on what the source material is. That's why, like, if you watch like with Little Women, you can put on any of the film versions, and while there's only one Jo March, every Jo March is going to be different from each, because each writer, finds different things in the character. They're like, you know what, we like this aspect about Jo more than these others, so we're really going to play up this part of her, but not this. And then sometimes I think they're too heavily influenced by, sometimes it's the studio or what have you, but that's, oh, you can't put something like that into a movie. Like you have to update this. You have to modernize to certain things. And I don't know if that's a way of like making something appealing to modern day, just to make it appealing to modern day audiences. We still have to be able to acknowledge, like, that's how things, great way of also being able to look at something and going like, that's what it was like. Look at how far we've come since then. Look at how much has changed. Look at how even back then, they were, keeping some of the norms. And I think, that gets lost when you're like, well, we have to change everything because audiences are going to want to watch this film.
Yeah, and I think in some ways that undermines the audience as well. People have the ability to relate to people who lived 150 years ago, because a lot of these things that happened back then, we can see them still in our society. The class differences, poverty. And I think in a lot of the Little Women adaptations, especially Laurie and Jo, a lot of their flaws are glossed over. And then there are other characters whose quote-unquote flaws are highlighted. Well, Amy mostly, because I think in the 1949 film, because I'm a big fan of Elizabeth Taylor, so I like everything where she's in. I think sometimes they make Amy the butt of the joke.
I think that especially with her, to quote the movie, her vocabulary, stuff that she, and I love the scene of her when she leaves the school and she has that like kind of like entitled air, where she's just like, oh, like, I told him that I wasn't gonna stand to be treated like this way, especially like, when Miss Lawrence is giving a party in my honor, when she leaves and the girls are just like stuck up. But I like how not as vain as they make her, but there is a softness to Amy in that movie, where even though she has those moments, because there's a quote in the book, I actually wrote down, where it says, Amy, though the youngest, was a most important person, in her own opinion at least. I think that movie kind of shows with a lot of how she acts when she's arguing with Joe, like when they're talking about the play. And she's like, what do you mean I don't know I'm a princess? And she's like, well, Meg knows. And she's like, well, of course Meg's supposed to know. She's like, well, I want to know too. You could see that as coming off like the bratty little sister. But I love that she throws in that line, a princess always knows she's a princess. And I think that kind of, that's Amy. That's like, I'm the princess of the family. Like, that's how I'm treated. But at the same time, like, she's still such a loving, supportive sister to do it to everyone. I mean, especially, I love that they show how close she is with Beth. Yeah, because I feel like when we watch the film versions, they always tend to pair Meg and Amy off together, and then Joe and Beth together. But that they complement each other, and maybe that is, that's true. But they're all sisters, so they all get along with each other. It's not, I think, in the book the way, obviously Amy and Beth were at the parties, but the fact that you get to see just that interaction, I think that's one of those changes where I'm okay that that's in there, because it's really showing the bond between these sisters, which at the end of the day, that's a big part of the story. It's family.
And I really like that scene in the film where they're at the party and Amy says to older Mr. Lawrence that Beth is shy. You can see how both Amy and Joe, they are connected by their will to protect Beth. In the novel, in the beginning of part 2, there's really a scene that I like. The narrator, Louisa May Alcott, she's like writing that Amy and Joe, when they were arguing, Amy got better and better making compelling arguments, and most of the time they just ended up laughing because they realized how silly their arguments were. And I think that happens in the 1949 film, or it captures some of that spirit. But in this film, Beth is the youngest.
Normally that would bother me to no end, but I absolutely adore Margaret O'Brien.
She's lovely.
You can make this change. I'm okay with this. And I think, because I got bored one day and I wrote it all down, she's one of the few actresses that was ever close enough in age to what the character is supposed to be. Beth at the beginning of the story is supposed to be 13, and Margaret O'Brien was 12. So she was only a year younger. I made like a spreadsheet where I wrote like all the actresses down. It's one of the things that, like, when you watch, this is just what I do because I get bored and I get curious about all this kind of stuff. Kirsten Dunst is technically the only one who was really the exact age. And Claire Danes was 15 when she played Beth. She was only like 2 years older. Because I think that's one of the things that sometimes with the film versions, it's hard to show that passage of time by just the appearance of the sisters, because like they're using one set of actresses for the most part.
Yeah.
And, I think that's why sometimes people forget how young they were in the beginning. Because I think the novel spans, about like 10 years?
You and I talk about this a bit, how in this film, Laurie, he sometimes criticizes Joe for wanting to work, to make money. He doesn't really pay attention to the things that are happening around him.
I actually wrote down one of the quotes that he says, or actually that Joe says, because there's a few in this movie, and it kind of shows, not that like it's a reason why Joe and Laurie aren't meant together, but as a way to show that they're not always on the same wavelength. But there's a scene in the 49 film when Beth is coming up into the attic. She's pretty much telling Joe, Laurie's here, and then she shows her the slippers that she's made for Mr. Lawrence. But when he tells Joe that Laurie is here, Joe's response was, I wish he'd realize I haven't the time for his nonsense. And, because she's just finished writing a story, which I love. I love that scene where as Beth's coming up, like Joe is just sobbing.
Yeah.
And Beth's like, what's the matter? And she's like, it's my story. And Beth's like, isn't it any good? She's like, oh, it's wonderful. But she spent all this time writing this story, this that she is now going to go and take to a publisher, at whether it's a newspaper or a magazine. Laurie just wants to do whatever. He wants to play hooky. He wants to just have fun. He wouldn't want to skip, school or what have you. Even in the scene where Joe and Laurie are in the attic before Beth comes home after seeing the Hummels when she gets scarlet fever. And he's just like, I don't understand how you could scribble all day. And she reaches into a box and she pulls out money. And his response is, well, I got plenty of that if you ever eat.
Yeah.
And, I know the Marches and the Lawrences are very close, but I mean, if push came to shove, the Marches wouldn't say no to help. But I can't see the Marches just being like, well, we've got some wealthy neighbors. They'll take care of everything. But the other important thing with those two scenes, to also add, after Joe, going back to that first part when Joe goes and takes her story to the newspaper, and Laurie, follows her, and he's like, what are you doing? When she shows him, what she did, and he's like, you got $1 for this? And in that scene, and also in the other scene going in the attic, Joe conveys to him, I love to write. It gives me this nervous feeling, I love it. There is a part of her that is doing it for the money. We know, even Louisa, she had to write to make money for her family. They loved to write. One of those where it's kind of showing you, Laurie just doesn't understand that. I think that's why not in that one, but I know at least in the 1994 version, when he proposes, I do like what he's like when Laurie says, you wouldn't have to write. And Joe looks, are you crazy?
Yeah, and that also happens in the novel.
And they, he's like, unless you wanted to. It's like he sweeps himself. So I do like at the 49 version, they show you that it's important to Joe, not just to write, but, now it's something that she's written, that she's been able, it's just a sense of independence. She's able, to provide for her family without having to ask for help. And Joe and Laurie, who kind of Amy says to him at one point, look at your hands. Your hands look like they've never done a hard day's work ever. Aren't you ashamed of a hand like that? And, Laurie, he's kind of had this silver spoon in his mouth. He's been really lucky. You could say that a part of it is he just doesn't understand because he's never lived with me.
Yeah.
But after having spent so much time with them, you think that he would understand a little bit better.
Yeah, I think in the novel, when we move on from part 1 to part 2, the girls have matured, but Laurie, he hasn't really grown up that much as a person. And it only happens with that character arc that he has with Amy, which would be so important that filmmakers would start to include that to their versions. But I really like that in the 1949 film, they acknowledged this big difference between Laurie and the Marches and Laurie and Joe's work morals. I think in the novel, sometimes Joe is even quite preachy to Laurie's lifestyle. She criticizes. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time. Take care and make good choices. Bye.